Hello, everyone, and welcome to the International African American Museum's Center for Family History podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today for what promises to be an engaging and an insightful discussion. I'd like to give a special welcome to our museum members. This podcast is live streaming right now on StreamYard, YouTube, Facebook page for Center for Family History, and also in the museum in Charleston, South Carolina. We're proud to bring you this monthly podcast series held every Saturday of the month, and we explore topics that bring African American history, genealogy, and culture to life. These conversations are part of our ongoing commitment to connecting communities with their rich and diverse heritage. I'm joined by Jennifer Randall. She is in the background on the stage. She is the program manager and lead archivist for the Center for Family History at the museum in Charleston. As we move through today's discussion, we encourage our attendees to participate actively. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box, and don't forget to put a Q in front of your question to help us spot it shortly. We'll open the floor for Q&A sessions at the end of our discussion, so stay tuned for that. Now let's welcome our distinguished guest. Please take a moment to introduce yourself, share your titles, and tell us a bit about your roles within your descendant groups. I'm going to start with Jessica Harris first.
Thanks so much, Shelley. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is Jessica Harris, and I serve as the Descendants of Enslaved Communities of Virginia. I serve as the president, and I'm thrilled to be here today. DEC is focused on uplifting stories and connecting the descendants. We serve the entirety of the Commonwealth of Virginia, with our flagship location being at the University of Virginia. So I'm based here in Charlottesville, and great to be joining you all virtually.
Thank you. Jasmine Henry.
Yes, it's a pleasure to engage with all of you today on this panel session this afternoon. I'm Jasmine Henry. I am the We Are Greenwood Program Director at Justice for Greenwood. So we are a network advocating for reparations and justice for the survivors and descendants of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Our mission is to secure justice and reparations for the Greenwood community and the diaspora through direct services and public education and advocacy. So as the program director, I oversee initiatives such as the Genealogy Project, which records families' heritage, and the Oral History Project, which shares the stories of the Greenwood descendants. These efforts aim to honor the past while inspiring our future generations and acknowledging Greenwood's rich culture. So if you would like to join our network, you can do that visiting our website or follow us on social media. Just look up Justice for Greenwood.
Thank you. Reverend Dante Eubanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Dante Eubanks, I am a director for the board of the Descendants of Jesuit Enslavement Genealogy Historical Society, as we call it, DJEGS. It is an organization that was birthed out of understanding the history associated with Georgetown's 1838 sale from 4 plantations in Maryland to Louisiana. But we quickly realized that the story is much more than just about one sale, one particular entity, but Jesuit enslavement goes back to the very founding and beginnings of Maryland's colonial history with the landing of the Ark and the Dove in 1634, excuse me. But Jesuit enslavement also encompasses a myriad of plantations throughout Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, also Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and even Delaware and Pennsylvania. And we know Delaware and Pennsylvania are considered free states, but there were Jesuit plantations in those places as well. And we strive to aim to connect all descendants associated with this history. Again, not just one sale, not just one plantation, but a history that spans centuries, but also is beyond what we know as the continent of North America. So even throughout the Caribbean and South America as well. Happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation today.
Awesome. And thank each of you. I'm thanking each of you for your introduction. And I always think it's better to let you guys introduce yourself instead of me introducing yourself, because you're going to add so much more flavor. So what we'll do is just have some discussion, and folks, of course, are open to put questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end, as I mentioned before. So the first question, and I'll just start with the same realm with Jessica, Jasmine, and then Dante. What inspired the formation for your descendant group? So, in other words, what was that initial goal that started it, and why? And why did they feel they needed to start that group? So, I'll throw that to Jessica.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. So DEC's mission is to research and reclaim the narrative, to honor the legacies of the enslaved and free Black communities and their descendants, and to achieve restorative justice for communities rooted at UVA, in Virginia, and beyond. And that really came out of, obviously, years of organizing, right? We know our mamas and grandmamas and their grandmothers and all of our communities have been organizing for a very long time to ensure that our community stories are told. So this isn't a new organization, but formally we've been around for about 5 years. And it really came out of the university at the time was putting together its memorial to enslaved laborers. There were over 4,000 enslaved individuals at the University of Virginia, similar to what you were saying, Dante, all of whom came from plantations across Virginia and beyond. And we really consider the enslaved communities of UVA to encompass those who were rooted at UVA, but also those whose labor helped, found and fund the university. And so we really have a broad definition of descendant. But rewinding back, right, the memorial was being built. Shelley was really part of those conversations, helping to identify descendants. And there were a number of descendants who'd been part of the design process for that memorial. UVA took a really kind of community-centered approach. And so really descendants had a seat at the table and said, there's something here, right? It's one thing to memorialize. It's another thing to move it into action. And so we are grateful that the memorial exists and that the university put that forward. But Dr. Shelley and others really said, hey, there's something here, right? You all have power. You all can stand in your power and mobilize to not just preserve this history, but move toward collective action. And so that's exactly what we did. Our organization became a 501c3 nonprofit. We're entirely independent from the university. We are really focused on uniting folks with each other, connecting them with their genealogy and their ancestry, and pushing for education and repair. And so those are really kind of at the heart of what we do. And while it might have been sparked by the initial energy around the memorial, as I mentioned, it's building on the shoulders of those who came before us. And we're really thankful that we have the opportunity now to use this organization as a way to funnel some resources and concerted effort toward the descendant movement. And so that's kind of how we came to be.
All right, Jasmine.
Yes, so actually Justice for Greenwood was founded 5 years ago. This is our 5-year anniversary. We are also a 501c nonprofit organization, and it was founded by our executive director and attorney, Demario Solomon Simmons. And he's been doing this work for the descendant community and the survivors for 20 plus years. So the We Are Greenwood program is rooted within Justice for Greenwood. It really came from an urgent need. So for over 75 years, the names, the faces, and the stories of the survivors and descendants of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre had been erased or ignored. Our work was inspired by the Equal Justice Initiative and the Georgetown Memory Project, as well as Eddie Faye Gates. And from the beginning, our goal has been simple but powerful. So we want to trace family lineage. We want to reclaim our history and build foundation for recognition, reparations, and repair. And so we've built this network of descendants and the last two remaining survivors, and we've just grown from that over the last 20 plus years of work that Demario has done, but also the last 5 years of our foundation as well.
Awesome. Dante.
So I would say, our beginnings really began because of the pandemic. Cousin Karen Harper Royal from New Orleans wanted to find a way for us to continue to connect. So she began a Zoom call every Thursday, and happy to say we've been going every Thursday since summer of 2020.
Wow.
And the formalizing of the organization for the Descendants of Jesuit Enslavement Historical and Genealogical Society began in 2023 to make it a well documented, but also 501c3 compliant organization. And just as Jessica mentioned, we are totally independent. We're not associated with one particular plantation, one particular Jesuit order or Sisters of Charity. We're not connected to Georgetown at all. But again, it's framing the entire history of Jesuit enslavement and bringing about unity. One of our tenets every week is if new people join the call, we help them navigate their DNA matches. We get them to learn, the small entities of the history, but then understand where they fit in the larger story. And it's very it's personal, it's intimate, but it's also we're helping each other navigate a history. One, keep it relevant. Two, make sure that our ancestors' voices are not only discovered, but heard, preserved, and carried forward. And then three, repairing the broken lines of our families and our communities because of Jesuit enslavement. So it's rallied us even more to get everyone to understand it's not a plantation, it's multiple. It's not a single family or surname that we're researching, but it's the entire history and how that history connects across the landscape of America, but then how it also, everybody has a piece to this history when we can help them discover it, whether it's through the paper trail or through the DNA.
So it's fascinating. I do want to make a comment that each of your groups do have a website, and I also want to say presence on Facebook. Is that correct? Okay, great. And I say that for the audience. So a lot of us that are tuning in and listening are genealogists or family historian. So how has genealogical research and historical documentation played a role in your mission and the work that each of your organizations do? And I'll just go back to you, Jessica, and just keep following to keep myself organized.
Don't break the circle. I love it. No, it's fantastic. And no, certainly if Jasmine, Dante, you all have thoughts, feel free to
please
jump in as well.
Yeah, but I will go to each of you.
That's great. Dr. Murphy, I think that's exactly at the heart of what we do. And I heard Jasmine and Dante, you share this as well. I mean, genealogy for us is really the lifeblood of what we do. What we hope to support is family reunification, right? We aren't trying to reinvent the wheel. We're really trying to equip families and individuals with tools to understand where they've come from and the legacy that precedes them. And so for us, we really find genealogy to be at the core of our organization's mission. Without understanding our past, without understanding where we've come from, we don't have that anchor to guide us, which I don't know how you all feel, but I think especially in this time is incredibly important to lean in on what has been done before, what foundations have been built, and whose shoulders are we standing on. So for us, genealogy has been a crucial part of that. And research as well, getting an understanding of not just who these individuals were, what their names were, but what life was like, what efforts they undertook, how are we understanding the landscape in which they lived. That broader context is especially important to make sure that we understand and grapple with the weight of that legacy, right? It's not just a name on a wall, but we are honoring living and breathing individuals that came before us. And so it's everything. We have a membership base of over 200 who have connected with our organization, who identify as descendants. And those are just folks who are formally part of our organization, not to mention the countless other descendants that live in Charlottesville and in Virginia. And so for us, genealogy remains an essential effort. And until all folks are able to have that shared understanding, we're going to keep pushing, we're going to keep fighting.
Which is very interesting, and I'm commenting because one of the biggest thrills for me as a researcher is when I do make that connection with that family, especially when they didn't know. And I think there's nothing better than when you're helping through. And that's actually how Dante and I attend Freedmen Fridays. That's how that got started. We're just really there. Yes, we're looking at a collection, but we're there to help people make connections. And every Friday, somebody gets helped, if not more than one person. And it's almost like it's got its own little mission it's taken on. But that was one way to find more descendants for these other projects that are going on. So, Jasmine, I'm going to turn it to you for the same question about genealogy and historical documents.
Yeah, so I really have to give it to my team of genealogists that work with us. We're a small but mighty team, but we are working with some phenomenal genealogists, Angela, Nika, Gail, and Ron. They have been doing an amazing job over the past few years. We wouldn't have probably built the network and been able to chronicle the amount of descendants without them. And so for us, genealogy is more than research. It's a form of justice. We're working from an ancestor forward thinking. So we're using census records, land deeds, freedmen rolls, school and church logs, military files. All these people, all these kind of pieces help rebuild a life story. And then we want to pair that with our oral histories, with our oral history project. And we've been able to tell the stories of over 70 have been recorded over the past few years. And so the facts give us the structure, but the voices really help bring it to life. And so together they restore the names and the stories and dignity that have been lost forever. And so a lot of the times when I'm talking to descendants, they had no idea that they had these connections in Greenwood, and they're discovering it for the first time, and they're making other family connections all across the country. It's really amazing to see and to hear how these stories are kind of built and how they're being able to be told once again after so many years of being erased and ignored.
So I also want to add some connection here before I go to you, Dante. Now, Jessica, the period of research is like 1817 to freedom per se, and after, of course. And Dante, when was the sale or leaving Maryland and heading to Louisiana? What date was that?
So that was the sale was 1838, but the articles of incorporation were drafted as early as 1835. But the letters to the Holy See in Rome began as early as the 1810s, just prior to the War of 1812. So it wasn't a secret.
Correct.
You know, it had been talked about for quite some time as to what to do with the enslaved prior to and leading up to the sale.
And then Jasmine, you mentioned the massacre was 1921.
Yes. And then so when we're doing the research, we're looking in a certain time period, 1921 to 1923. We're looking for survivors during that period and connecting them with their descendants.
So look at the landscape here, the history here. And I don't want to say it's repeating because everything is a little different. We got renting going on, we got a sale going on, and we got a massacre going on. So I find this very fascinating that wants me to know more. So Dante, I'll come back to you on the genealogy and the historical document question.
So it's interesting. Jessica alluded to it a little bit, as well as Jasmine. A lot of us were researching as our own family griots, right? You know, we were documenting, doing interviews with the elders and community members. And for some, learning that the church, their faith was tied to enslavement, it was a hard pill to swallow for many. And then for some, they knew the history, it was just never public. And I'll come back to that statement, public. But looking at the documents, again, a lot of people know about the GU 272. They know about the sale to benefit Georgetown, the 4 plantations from Maryland, 1 in Charles County, 1 in Prince George's County, 2 in St. Mary's County. But prior to those 4 and those people being sold, the Jesuits' history goes back again. The Ark and the Dove landed in Maryland in 1634. Their earliest records of documenting enslaved and how they acquired enslaved from those local settlers who were Catholic families goes back to the late 1600s. So the Jesuit enslavement had been around for so long, so you can't just bucket it into a sale that benefited Georgetown in 1838. So I said I'll come back to public. What we've learned in reading through the records and looking at the day books of the Jesuit priests and looking at the colonial records of Maryland, but then also understanding the migration of what we know is the League of Catholic Families out of Maryland into Kentucky, and then the spread and expansion of Catholic education as well as Catholicism throughout the early history of the Americas, we realized that it's just more than the Jesuits. It's the families, giving their enslaved to the church as an offering. It's those families working together to trade. I will give you my enslaved servant so that he or she can marry the one that they love that is being enslaved by the Jesuits or by the sisters on their property. And we're seeing these records more and more, and you're finding so many nuggets of information that tells a much bigger story. Again, I think the historians in the beginning of the Georgetown Memory Project wanted to just focus on Georgetown, but the families, the descendants, know it's much bigger than Georgetown. Georgetown is just one of many institutions that benefited off of the enslavement by the Jesuits as well as the sister orders. So combing through these records, it has been a gold mine. And also it has been an inspiration and an encouragement for us to continue to stay in the records, continue to reach across county lines, state lines, to tap into other descendant groups, because ironically, the Jesuit enslavement story connects with some of the enslaved communities of Virginia because of the history that's tied to ironworks, that's tied to the political scene that was going on at that time. So it's a huge story. And so the records have become, we learn something new week by week, month by month, to where we're starting to, we're scratching our head. We're like, man, I thought I knew a little bit, and we're learning, man, we're just scratching the surface.
And it's interesting because I think that's with all 3 groups. But I do want to ask the question, basically looking at the Georgetown and thinking of the trail leaving out of Maryland and heading down, and were they buying and selling as they were going down? And I'm going to say to Louisiana, was there transactions happening along the way? And I say that as a researcher, thinking that somebody could have got dropped off in Maryland or sold in Maryland and didn't make it all the way to Louisiana or Alabama. You know what I'm saying? Were there transactions also going on their trail going down to Louisiana?
I would say, I'm not going to say it's not out of the possible. What we are seeing is there is a lot of bartering and trading. I'll use those words, if you will, between the Jesuits and then also the families that are supporting the Jesuits. There's a lot of, everyone knows about Franklin and Armfield. Everyone knows about Austin Woolfolk. there is a lot of documentation just centered around Franklin and Armfield out of Port of Alexandria, and then Austin Woolfolk out of Baltimore, with the same ships that are leaving out of those ports on a periodic cycle, going direct from Maryland and Virginia down to New Orleans. In addition, what you're seeing is that the receivers, or those that are the agents in New Orleans, they've already got, if you will, contracts or promissory notes, or there's letters back and forth amongst other plantation owners in that area. And one of our prominent researchers in the organization, Nagest, has found so much information around the sisters, and how these, where there's institutions, the sisters are right next door, running the convents, but you don't hear that portion of the story being talked about in the entirement of Jesuit enslavement. So there is a lot of documentation, and even the expansion from Maryland into Kentucky, and then Maryland to St. Louis, when they started the mission there is so many letters back and forth amongst the Jesuit priests, and then letters also with those prominent Catholic families of when they're going to arrive, how they're going to start, how the estates are going to be built, or how the education institutions or the places of worship are going to begin. And you see them sending back and forth the blacksmiths, the wheelwrights,
skilled the skilled workers,
workers,
or skilled hands, as they could refer to.
So the DNA is showing families that they're like, I had no idea we had a Maryland connection, or I had no idea we had a Missouri connection, or we're in Alabama, we never went to Louisiana. The documentation and the DNA is proving that there was a lot going on.
And that's why I asked that question. Yeah, because I'm thinking of the journey. There had to be buying and selling happening, because where you're finding descendants and with that DNA, it has to be, if they're coming from different states, on the way down, if that DNA is popping up, somebody showed up in that area. And so I think each of these programs are distinct, but the bottom line is we're still trying to find descendants, and they might not be, say, in Oklahoma or Charlottesville, Virginia. These descendants could come from anywhere. And again, that's where I think the genealogy is so important, and especially when you're tracking African American genealogy. And my number one rule, everything I want to know about African Americans, I'm going to have to research the white Americans. I have to connect the two, because just the way you talked about it, or what happened in Tulsa, who is around your people? So with African American genealogy, there's challenges. So I want to know what challenges each of your groups are facing, even as far as getting recognition and resources or support from other institutions in the community broader. So I'll throw it back to Jessica.
Thanks. And I appreciate that framing. And Dante, it was really powerful to hear about the journey and all of the mapping there. And just to tie to what you shared at that end there, Shelley, I mean, I think that's exactly why we are looking at this across the state of Virginia, and not just in the city of Charlottesville, because there are so many folks that are coming and going, and the ways in which communities are moving. And at some point, it's, we recognize our descendants are all across the country, all across the world. And so being able to, I heard the other day, one of our descendants shared the phrase universal cousins, right? And the ways in which we all are sort of universal cousins. So I appreciate that. But to your question about challenges, I mean, I think there's a number of challenges that we're facing, some of which are in our communities, and some are just part of this time that we're in. The first one that I think we are running into is our older populations, unfortunately, are taking stories with them, and we haven't done as good a job of preserving those stories and really making sure that we are sharing those, documenting them, oral histories, writing things down, focusing on Black archives, right? How are families preserving their documents, their photos, And I do fear, and part of what propels us forward is making sure that we take time to capture all of those stories, especially in this generational, transition. And to that end, that means we have to engage our young folks. And I think that's a challenge as well, is reminding the youth of why this work matters, and reminding them of the legacy that they are a part of, and caring about this work, right? Instilling that passion and care is hard, but it's essential. And we have to make sure we're doing a better job tying those cycles and circles together. And so that's something in our communities, right? And I've experienced that personally, right? My family for a number of years didn't talk openly about these things. We weren't as forthcoming as we are today. And that's with large thanks to you, Shelley, of helping us understand our family stories. But we have to do a better job of encouraging that dialogue, and viewing that genealogical work as repair. Jasmine, I love what you shared there. That's something that we as an organization really hold on to, but we have to make sure that we are uplifting that as a tool for repair, both in our own families and in our communities. And the broader challenge that I think maybe all of us can speak to here is, it's a time that we're living in right now in terms of Black history, uplifting Black history, telling Black history. And it's just emphasized the why of why we need to do this work. It's so important that we uplift these stories. It is incredibly important that we find space in our communities to preserve those stories, because it's not going to always be easy. It hasn't always been easy, and certainly this is a period of challenge, but our ancestors have been through this before. And so it's, again, reminding us of doubling down on our why. And funding is always a challenge, right? How are we securing funding to do this work? How are we collaborating with other organizations to really braid this ecosystem of descendants and lean into the descendant movement? I think that's a unique opportunity rather than a challenge, but it's going to take some strategic thought to get there. Those are some of the challenges I'll share for now. But I think all of them for us have really turned into opportunities, and ones that emphasize and propel us forward.
It's a great points there, Jasmine.
Yeah, I really want to echo what Jessica said about making sure we are cognizant of our older generation and the stories that they share. And when you think about it, if you are not familiar, most people are, but if you're not familiar with the story of Greenwood, it was the largest act of domestic terrorism in the US. And so much of the property was destroyed, including, so we have destroyed missing records deliberately. And so it really slows down the work that we do when we can't find those records. It leaves gaps in the research that we have to creatively fill. And as we think about our last two remaining survivors, 111, 110 years old, we want to keep capturing their stories and the stories of their descendants. So those first generation, second generation descendants as well. And so we have to engage them in any way possible. And so we have to, sometimes it's meeting them where they are, whether that's through different types of technology and resources, or even just having events that bring them to us so that we can take down their stories and their oral histories verbatim, because sometimes it's easier to have those stories be recorded verbally for some of the older generations. And so we also face some institutional resistance. So whether that's reluctance to acknowledge the history, which happens and has been happening and continues to happen, or there's the lack of funding that we receive and support. And we've all been dealing with it as the new administration and things have been changing and trying to find funding and losing funding. And so one of the biggest things that I want to kind of end with is that we're always guarding against the risk of our stories being told about us rather than by us. And so I think that's really, really important that we continue to make sure that we're being descendant led and getting those stories being told from them on first count. Yeah.
Awesome. Passing it on, Dante.
Jessica and Jasmine are tough acts to follow.
But hey, just ditto what they said.
Jessica hit on a very key point with losing our elders. And that's something we talk about a lot in our organization, is tapping into that diminishing resource. Because they are a resource. And what Jasmine just keyed on too is deliberate destruction of records. And I'm going to add deliberate denial of access is what we are facing quite a bit. Again, I go back to a comment I made earlier. Jesuit enslavement was, air quotes, not public. However, every Jesuit priest has written a paper, gave a dissertation, taught a class on this history for years. So when we say not public, that's that deliberate denial to the descendant community that's just trying to find a name, trying to make a connection, rediscover their family. I think another challenge that we face also with Jesuit enslavement and the migration patterns, there was so much movement amongst the plantations in Maryland. Then add in the migration to Florissant, Missouri, then add in the continual migration, and then now Missouri is now going to Kentucky and then going to Louisiana, and then Maryland's going to Louisiana. Then Maryland went to Georgia. And then from Louisiana, they branched out to several of the parishes. So there's so much movement amongst the enslaved. Families are broken. Families are separated over and over. And that happened and plagued the history of Jesuit enslavement for so long that now we're just small nuggets. DNA matches are introducing whole new communities. But their DNA and the matches, it's telling no, they truly are descendants, but how did they get there? You know, it's now trying to find that path, those nuggets, those breadcrumbs, if you will, through the forest of trying to repair and reconnect those families. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. We recently had a wonderful
I was going to say the next question is about a success, so go for it.
We were able to test a 99-year-old cousin living in Baltimore, and several of us were chatting it up, just trying to, I got a test. You go by my mom's house, she has a test. And our cousin that lives nearby, cousin Jerome, who was excellent, Jerome Spears, excellent in DNA research. He went by, was able to get this elder gentleman's DNA who knew nothing, excuse me, of his paternal history. He is matching everybody. Maryland to Missouri to Louisiana. I mean, matching everybody. So we were able, that's the success. We were able to tap into that diminishing resource. But it's still a challenge because now we're trying to pull out of the memory banks what he does know to make the connections on so much that was lost for his entire life.
So Jessica, share an example of a success of a breakthrough that you're aware of. Could be your own or whatever that connects to your project.
Absolutely. I mean, Shelley, you can speak to this better than anyone. We're finding descendants quite frequently. And I think the most powerful part of that ties to what you just shared, Dante, is descendants finding each other and finding new communities, and finding cousins they didn't know they had, siblings they didn't know they had. One of our descendants discovered cousins and half sisters and all this family work. And sometimes, we've talked about this before. Sometimes those stories can be hard for folks. It's not always an exciting revelation, but I think what is most powerful about them is at the end of the day, when folks are able to tap into that which is truly deep inside of them, there's still something so powerful, no matter if you were expecting it or not. So that's been huge for us. I think what is powerful about all of our organizations and about the work you do, Dr. Murphy, is how it brings people together and really fosters a community. So regardless of the level of the breakthrough, whether it was a cousin or a third cousin twice removed or an ancestor down the line, being able to pinpoint where you've come from and find other cousins has been powerful. And something I'll share too, we have monthly membership meetings where folks are constantly on the Zoom saying, hey, I'm also descended from that person, or that
Right.
person's in my tree, that person's in my line. And so getting to see that on a monthly basis is just so powerful. And for folks to stay in touch with each other and share stories. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, it's not just about the names you find, but it really is about those stories that you can share, painting the full picture of who these people were and the communities that they have left and continue to support. And so for us, that's just so special. So I can't pinpoint one particular one, but we have them frequently, and
Yes.
getting to foster the community is really the exciting part.
And I'll make a comment. There was one time when there was a Descendants Day, they were adding a couple names on the memorial. And I'll say it this way. I saw a couple with their children, 2 sons, at the memorial pointing to the ancestors. So you know that daddy and mama was telling those boys who that was or how it
Exactly.
connected to them.
Yep.
That I thought was the greatest success I had seen, because that now led to another generation. And
That's
I
right.
thought, that's what we're trying to do, make those connections, all of these groups and things.
That's right. And never forget where they come from. Absolutely.
And yes, and they will always know, at least for this situation, they got that memorial. So when they grow up to be a parent, they're going to take their kids there and say, see, this is your so-and-so, so-and-so. So it was just,
Absolutely.
that was one of those tear-jerking moments to see those kids there and
Absolutely.
stuff. So I really appreciate it. And also, so Jasmine, can you share a success that you guys have had, or an example, and you talked about, descendants, that is there just 2 still living, as far as the line, not descendants, but 2
The survivors, yes,
from
Viola
time.
Ford Fletcher and Mother Randall as well. And so,
Okay.
yeah, just being able to see the connections with the descendant groups whenever we have like in-person meetings or events, that's very powerful. This is a very traumatic event. And so when people find out that they're descendants, it could be very hard for them, but it's also like connecting a lot of gaps and fills in a lot of missing links that they've had. And for so long, so many of their family have been silent about it. And so to be able to find their roots and connections to Greenwood and the Tulsa area, find out that they had property, find out that their parents or family members and grandparents were like business owners, it really changes some of their lives and perspectives.
Sure.
And really shows them like how their family is so well established in the Greenwood community, and how great and wealth of knowledge and a wealth of community that was. And so we are really proud to represent one of the largest descendant groups from the Tulsa Race Massacre. We're over 1,000 in our community right now, and continuing our reach and network continues to grow every day. And really this year we were honored to receive a SLAM Showcase Award from the National Genealogical Society, which recognized one of our projects as one of the most comprehensive genealogy efforts connected to a historical racial atrocity. We were able to do some genealogy workshops for the community last year, and so we submitted that event to the SLAM Showcase, and we continue to do those workshops for the descendant community and the Tulsa community. But the accolade was significant for us because it sent a powerful message. Your community-led efforts, they matter, and restoring memory is an essential form of justice. And so we're really proud of that, and we're really proud of what our descendant community has done. And I cannot it would be really important to not talk about on June 1st that the mayor of Tulsa actually introduced the Road to Repair, which is a reparations plan. And Demaria, our executive director, has been working on Project Greenwood for a while, and it had so many initiatives that the mayor implemented in this Road to Repair. And so it includes the release of records too. So he had been asking for years and years and years for these records to be released. And the mayor and the city of Tulsa released those records, and they're creating this reparation plan around legacy and trust, and hoping that there'll be some housing initiatives as well. And so we're really, really proud of that, and hoping to continue to work on ways to help make sure the descendants are really supported.
So one of the goals of this conversation is to spark an initiative in others to possibly be interested in setting up or joining a descendant group. So what advice would each of you give as first steps to take? And this can be random. I'll go off my little script here. This can be random because I think if people are tuning in and listening, you're giving out tips along the way. And you can see a pattern forming here. So now I want to know how to get started, if I could see. And it could be just on my family. It could be the community that we're in. And I know we've been there for a long time. And that's about it. Is, hey, we've been in this county for a long time, but to start a descendants group, what would be some recommendations on the first steps for someone to get started? And again, whoever wants to go first.
I would say, number one, understand you're already a part of a descendant group in your family. If you're, many families have reunions, tap into that, capitalize on that. Find those cousins that are just as quirky and geeky like you, that want to stay up late at night and get into the records and the matches and share. I mean, we've come a long way from when we had expensive phone bills, when we was trying to find that best 10 cent a minute plan, because you were on the phone, documenting as much as you could. So we already have some history and experience with being a part of a group. I would say one of the first steps would be document what your purpose is going to be. What is your purpose? Is that to continue the family legacy? Is it to share the community history? Is it to preserve a particular place of worship or educational institution's history and everyone that was a part of that? What's your purpose? If your purpose is to connect as many descendants as possible, to reach across and bring together communities from all different areas, different states, different towns, counties, whatever that purpose is, document it and know that it can change. Yes. As you grow, as you mature, your purpose can change throughout that organization. Second, I would say a lot of people, and this is just Dante's opinion, a lot of people sometimes think that an organization has to be about profit. It does not.
No.
Truth be told, all of us in genealogy and history, we know it is not about profit. We have a calling on our life. We've answered an assignment in our present time, in our respective generation, to champion that purpose. So I would say document your purpose. What is it going to be, and where do you want to go? And make sure you find some allies that are willing to stand in the gap with you, because there's going to be ebbs and flows, right? With it, but I would say it all starts with purpose.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make a side comment before one of y'all. One of the things when you all talked about the elders, don't just think about the elders, because you know what? Those cousins maybe in your same age range might have got the same story a little differently. So you want to tap into not only to the elders, but also get to the cousins and the aunties and stuff as well. Because again, I start off a story in my own family where there's two versions of the Davis story, and then totally found out 12 years later, it wasn't even the Davis story. And I got versions for 50 some years, but everybody heard differently what they heard. So I think that's another challenge that we might all have within our own families, and also these descendant groups. You got to gather as much as we can. So Jessica, I don't know if you or Jasmine wanted to comment on some steps of people thinking about it. So your turn.
Yeah, thanks. No, absolutely. I think to that last point, when folks ask me who am I descended from, I always start with, well, my mom, my dad, my grandmother, right? The kind of immediate family.
Yeah.
And it can be, to your point, Dante, start there, right? Preserve your own family history.
What
Make
you
sure
know.
that you are right. Take up the mantle as your own personal family historian. Capture what you have, and I think that is. For me, that's always where I point people is what can you do most immediately? What's within your scope of control? And then to your point, Dante, what do you want to do beyond that, right? How can you connect with your cousins, with your extended family? For us as an organization, we charted a mission and we brought folks together to have intentional conversations. And Dr. Murphy, you were a huge part of that. And so we really are grateful for your guidance there. But really being able to have difficult, meaningful, purpose-driven conversations with other descendants to say what power can we step into and how can we kind of galvanize our efforts, I think is important. And you don't have to have a 501c3 to do this work. It certainly for us has been important for us to have that because we need to be able to, fundraise and be independent and have that organizational structure. But family reunion committees aren't 501c3s, and bringing people together does not have to be a formal event. And so I encourage folks to think about what you can do most immediately, how you can connect to your broader community, and what impact you hope to have. I think that will help guide other efforts. And if you do decide to become a 501c3, it's not as scary as people make it out to be. So happy to be a resource for folks. It certainly takes work and it's not easy, but I'm happy to be a resource for anyone who has questions about that process. Jasmine, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but those are my immediate.
No, I want to echo both Dante and Jessica. I think they're right with starting with records, oral histories. I think all of it's just the backbone to the research. You can set up ways for your community to connect with you. So what we do is we do a descendant contact form using social media, Facebook, Instagram. People are really heavy on TikTok. Making TikToks and connecting through social media is a great way to really build a community. Partner with genealogists or historians if you have the access to legal advocates. I think that could be really important, beneficial. And I think one of the main things is just always like Dante said, let your descendants lead the direction of your work and the purpose.
So looking ahead, this is not almost the last question because I want to give each of you one thing you'd like to share as a takeaway for today. But this question, I just want to know for each of your groups, what are the next big goals or initiatives that your groups are working on? And I want to tie in another thing. How, wherever your path is going, how do you want to connect people in the community to also work with you on your next initiatives or goals set? So I'm looking to, help people realize there's opportunities here working with the descendant groups, but we also want to know what is your path or vision, say, for the next couple of years. Because again, we've heard it several times, we're in trying times right now. And so the goals that we have set for 2026, a lot of stuff around America 250 and so forth. But what are each of you looking at, and how can you engage someone in the community that might not be a descendant, but to be involved? So Jessica, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, thanks. For us, we are really excited about stepping into this Descendants of Enslaved Communities of Virginia work, and really bringing along not just descendants of identified enslaved communities, but of free Black towns, of churches, of other spaces where there are descendants, right? And really being able to view that as part of this ecosystem. We really find that bringing folks together and having intentional conversations, regardless of who you're descended from, regardless of how you're identifying is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of moving some real action forward. So for us, we are excited, and we, extend an invite out to anyone who wants to be part of this work, to really join us in telling a full history and making sure that we are helping reunite families and working towards continued education and scholarships and things of that nature. And so that's really what we're excited about. And I'll maybe share more about this later, but we have an upcoming Descendants Day symposium. Dr. Murphy will be presenting, along with Nika Segal-Smith, who was mentioned earlier as well, talking about genealogical work. But the symposium is focused on the legacies of education and activism and how we as a community have come together before in these times. And we're really excited to have space for those conversations. It's open to any folks. You can learn more on our websites. But all to say, to your question, for us, it's really about finding those other communities and partners, and really creating this web of descendant communities, right? We partner with descendants from presidential homes. We partner with descendants from other universities. Again, the web is just so vast. And so for us, we're really thrilled that folks are joining our organization, maintaining their independent kind of descendant groups and status, but becoming part of this larger umbrella so that we can mobilize together. And that's what we're really excited about.
Because each group is a resource. And I'm thinking genealogy gold mine for each of the members, for people coming in and reconnecting. So Jasmine, you're looking ahead.
Yeah, so we're really about restoring dignity and truth, one name at a time and a story at a time. So like every piece of this work, it builds evidence for the reparations that we seek. We're wanting to change how history will be taught in the classrooms and ensure future generations inherit a record that's truthful and whole. And so there's numerous ways you can support our efforts, through funding, donating to our projects, volunteering your skills, and then sharing your stories on your own platforms. Initially, I think that it's also important to advocate for descendant groups and policies that protect our communities. And then an important personal action you can take is to encourage your family member to become the keeper of your family's history and information, ensuring that these stories and memories are preserved for your future generations. As far as like looking ahead for Justice for Greenwood and our We Are Greenwood program, our next step is always trying to grow and expand our descendant network. We're wanting to connect as many families here in Tulsa and across the country. So we're trying to build our genealogy program and uncover more lineages, and also capture some more firsthand accounts through our oral history project that were lost before. And so the more we grow, the stronger our collective will be. And we're wanting to make sure that we have this truth-telling and healing and justice for all of our descendant community at the end of the day.
Great. Dante, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I would say we are excited always about continued growth and continued sharing of this history centered around Jesuit enslavement. We are gearing up for what I think is going to be an awesome opportunity for members of the organization and also families to be able to tour some of the other sites associated with Jesuit enslavement. And that's been something that we've been working on over the past couple years, actually, here in the state of Maryland. Members of the board recently got to tour some of the Carroll properties of the Carroll family, which is a very prominent Catholic family in Maryland, and a huge part of Jesuit enslavement. And it was eye-opening for each of us in our own respective right, because it again introduced a whole nother level of migration, a whole nother level of the movement of the enslaved. And so it kind of sews into that story of just when you think you know the history, there is more. So we're excited about that. And we're also excited for anyone. I just want to say, you don't have to be a descendant to join the organization. You can be a supporter. But we found many, as they're joining, they're learning that they do have some connection. And sometimes that connection is because their family was on the neighboring plantation, but members of their family were enslaved by the Jesuits. And that's a real story. So we're always excited to welcome new members, and also we're here to help. We're here to help people repair the broken lines in the family.
It's almost like we're carrying the torch, the descendant groups, and this is my view, because we got generations that are coming. We're dealing with certain generations now. Things have changed. So to me, the descendant groups are so key to keeping these stories alive, because no matter what book gets closed or what institution gets shut down or whatever, the descendants are still carrying that story. So if you, as we wind this down, and we'll go to Q&A, there's a comment that people asked about Freedmen Barrel Friday. This ties into everything you guys are doing, because that is a platform for people to come together, get help, know resources. And it's called Freedmen Barrel Fridays, and you can find it on Facebook. There is a link. And so we know the Freedmen Barrel is critical for some of the research that's happening now, because it basically began right after the Civil War. And so you had field offices set out throughout the South. And so 1865 to say 1872, we are looking at 3.4 million records every Friday. So we are tapping in. Matter of fact, last night we were looking at Alabama. But it's when people make connections, which is the goal. So if each of you had one takeaway, you want someone that listens to this video, this podcast, if there's one takeaway, what would it be that you hope they would walk away with? And then we'll go to the Q&A if there's any questions. So Dante, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
I'm breaking the cycle.
Yeah. I would say the one takeaway that I hope someone walks away from hearing our discussion is, even though I'm representing descendants of Jesuit enslavement, even though Jasmine is representing the history centered around Tulsa, which is huge, right? It's huge in itself. Jessica's representing what began as UVA, but expanded to the communities associated. We're also realizing, even today, this panel is representative of a community. We each are coming from a different perspective, a different angle, if you will, but we're coming together as a descendant community to talk about the challenges, the change, what we're doing, where we're going, and what we would like to see. And it all goes back to our purpose. It goes back to our calling. I would say, there is so much information readily available. You can find DJEGS on Facebook, website, YouTube, and just type in Jesuit enslavement. It'll explode. But there is something there to be found. There is something there to be shared. And there is something there for each and every person to launch forward in order to tell their family's story.
Thank you for that. Jasmine.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people sometimes think about genealogy and they get a little overwhelmed. And I think that you can just start simply by just asking questions, asking your parents, asking grandparents, asking family members, taking time to record those conversations. And then a lot of people during COVID, I think maybe even before COVID, they started having like Zoom meetings with their families, having those conversations, and then, you know, designating somebody as a record keeper is very helpful. Even like Dante said, you don't have to be a part of our descendant group to support us. Just being able to learn more about what happened in Tulsa, to learn more about what happened to each of our descendants is important. And then to continue to share that information with other people, share that on your platform, whether you don't think you have a platform or not. Nowadays, people can get on the internet and they become, you know, Instagram famous, they go viral. And so sharing those stories and sharing your experience is really beneficial. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that people can do, is to continue to share and advocate for yourself and for your community.
Awesome. Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to echo what both Jasmine and Dante said. I think for DEC, right, we view truth telling and memorialization and genealogical work as repair and for repair, right? So Jasmine, to your point, every single role that you play in your family, in your community, in your, you know, broader space has an impact. And so not minimizing, even being able to sit down with your cousin, your grandmother, and capturing those stories is an act of repair. You're giving them the gift of their own words and preserving their words and their legacies. And so don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and get started, and also view this as part of a larger effort. I think that's what's really propelled us forward. You know, we're utilizing all the tools in front of us for collective action and collaboration, and that includes oral histories, that includes scanning documents and photos, but it also might include, you know, mobilizing and supporting the youth in your community and giving them resources to learn and grow, or connecting with local faith-based organizations to ensure that your communities are supported. So a mentor and colleague once said, you know, everyone plays a role along the Underground Railroad. It's going to take all of us, and not just those leading the way, not just those in the homes, not just those mapping out the routes, but it really takes all of us. And so we look forward to continuing that work together.
Awesome. All of you, great takeaways. And again, I love the aspect that the connection of the three different periods, different states, everything different, just different of the whole context of what was going on. Each of them are different. And so I enjoy about this. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience. And so I'm going to read. Reginald said, to any of the guests, did any of you get resistance from elders when asking questions? And if so, how do you maneuver around that? So that's open for any of you. And all of you are on mute.
Like the nose goes, right? No, go ahead, Dante. You got it.
If you don't respond, I will respond. Dante, you came off mute first.
I would say yes. There was resistance specific to Jesuit enslavement. People could not, because of their faith, just could not believe that the church was a part of slavery. They could not reconcile that. So they didn't even want to talk about it. How we maneuvered around that is going again back to just family. Faith was a big part of the family. So let's talk about that. Why was it a big part of the family? And what's the history behind that? Once we got to talking about just the family history and their faith, that kind of put things at ease a little bit from that perspective. But there's also, I think in that, you have to meet people where they are. You know, in this space, you have to meet people where they are. But also another way to get around that is everybody has a clue. Everybody has a connection, a key, a resource, something that you're not going to find in a book. You're not going to find in a record set. And DNA is leading to that. But the more you involve those, even if there seems to be the resistance, the more you talk about it, but talk about it in a space that's inviting, where everybody has a voice, that makes a difference.
Got it. Anyone else want to comment? Jessica, you came.
I'll just say briefly, and I see in the chat, meet people where they are, but do not leave them there. I think, thank you for sharing that. One of the tools that I found most useful is reminding folks of the why, right? We talked about this earlier,
Right.
why these stories matter, why we are engaging in this conversation now, and that it's a point of pride, right? Our histories, our legacies, regardless of how we view them today, make us who we are. And so embracing that as a prideful opportunity to stand in that legacy and move it forward has been helpful. I'll also say, pointing to the fact that there are so many other folks that are engaging in this work has been useful. I think for so long, we just didn't have an awareness of other efforts because we didn't have things like you were saying, Jasmine, right? Social media and other means of connection. And so it could feel very isolating, but I know working with elders in my own family and in our communities, being able to point to work that's being done across the country and say, you're not alone. This is something that we are undertaking together has been incredibly useful. So thanks for that point, Dante, and agreed, meet people where they are, but don't leave them there.
Yeah, I think Shannon Christmas said that in the chat. So kudos to Shannon, who also worked with the GU 272 project. Jasmine, did you want to comment, or you
just one thing, because a lot of our descendant community, there was a lot of silence and stories that weren't told, and then people still ask within their families, and they're not getting some of the answers that they want. But I think it's really important that we have these descendant communities. So maybe if you're not getting some of the answers within your own family, you might find some answers, or at least be able to have those conversations with other people in the community. It might not be a full healing process for you at that moment, but at least you're able to make some connections and to build upon that. And then maybe it's a time thing. Some people just find out that they're a descendant and they just need the time to kind of process that. And so you can always, I feel like, sometimes give it some time and then circle back. So,
which is nice because each of your groups have monthly meetings and resources that are out there to help people come in and get engaged. So kudos to all three of you. Last question, and for Regina. The symposium is September the 13th, and it is on Facebook under Descendants of Enslaved Communities. So I'll just put that out there so you'll find a link, and I can always resend it to you if you don't see it and stuff. So the last question is from Anthony. Anthony says, how do you plan to preserve the research of your group? This one is critical. And so Dante, you're leading this time.
Okay, catching me off guard. So our number one plan is to document. We tell everyone all the time, document your findings, write your story. I believe earlier, and I don't know if it was Jasmine or Jessica, but very key point. Do not rely on institutions to tell your family story, because 9 out of 10 times they're going to get it wrong, and they're not even going to tell what's important. It's going to be from their perspective, their narrative. So documentation is a big tenet of our organization. And then also ensuring people know where to find the records, helping them to navigate the various record sets and whatever databases they are. I'll say, everyone knows of Family Search and Ancestry and even MyHeritage, but each of them individually has their own unique records and how they're digitized, as well as if they are indexed and how they're indexed. So we help people to navigate through that and understand how to find those nuggets of information in the record sets. But document. Again, we're all members of descendant groups, and we're all experienced with our very first descendant group, and that's our family. So document your family story. It is very, very important. A lot of people tend to come and they want to know how they tie to a specific place, a specific person, because that just happens to be the most talked about person, or it's a popular place or popular surname. Your family is important.
Right.
What's the story in your direct line that tells the very essence and shares that love story from your perspective? So document your family story and know that your family story is connected to the very history of this nation, from wherever that may be. It's important.
Got it. Jasmine, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm echoing Dante about documentation. And then when you're documenting, just as a researcher, I think it's really important to make sure you're storing it in different areas. You want to make sure, just in case, you just never know what's going to happen, whether you're just downloading it to a drive or something, and then or you have some online drives that you want to keep that information preserved, print it out and put it in like, I've seen so many people come to our genealogy workshops. They have like big binders and, yes, of things, but making sure that the documentation that you're preserving into those binders, you're keep shaping some of those documents in nice laminated areas that'll they'll stay forever. You can buy fireproof safe and things like that for stuff. But I think it's really important to make sure it's backed up in multiple areas, because you just never know what's going to happen, and have it forever to keep, and then be able to have it stored online as well.
Jessica.
Absolutely. No, Anthony, thanks for the question on preserving the research. I mean, absolutely, documentation is the first and foremost step needed to be taken. I want to pick up on what Dante shared too, of how institutions can't always be trusted to tell our own stories. And so something that DEC is focused on currently is we're exploring building out a community Black archive, right? How can we make sure that there is an archive that is accessible, that is relational, that can communicate with other databases, that can capture stories from all these different places, and that centers our narratives as we choose to tell them. And so we are currently in conversations now, looking at a few potential options. In the meantime, we have a Dropbox folder for our members where they're able to store their items, and we are able to share that out with folks. And so that's one way that we work to preserve those. And Jasmine, totally want to second what you said about making sure that you have the backup to the backup to the backup, and that you preserve the physical copies as well. I think sometimes people think they can digitize and then get rid of the physical items, and that's like, it makes me sad to think about that. And so we're trying to make sure that we are providing as many tools to descendants to preserve their own stories. It can be overwhelming to know where to start. But for us, the bigger question that we're grappling with right now is, how do we build out a community-driven archive that all folks can tap into in a way that centers their narratives in ways that they so choose? And I think that's so important. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by colleagues such as those on this call who are also thinking about this work, because hopefully, when I started my research journey, it was a struggle to find materials, but I'm hoping that for my children and grandchildren and their children, it'll be a lot easier because of efforts we're taking now to preserve these histories. So lots to look forward to for sure.
Absolutely. So I thank all of you for your input in everything. And I'm taking away key points: document for preservation, and also share. So if you do write something on your family, share it. Someone else will probably hold on that. I've got my Dropbox, and for different versions of the same story, as I mentioned before, or something I'm questioning about a document. So I think whatever we can do based on all of your suggestions that your groups are doing, I think gives individuals the same type thing. And also think about, again, the family descendant group. And Dante, I think you said it, we're already a community, where our family's at. So I just want to say thank you. I'm going to close it down now. And thank you all for joining us today for this podcast with the International African American Museum Center for Family History. Heartfelt thanks to the panelists today for each of you sharing your knowledge, your perspective, and dedication to preserving that history of the work that you do. Your work is not only inspiring, but it's so crucial to ensuring that these stories are remembered and celebrated. So again, that's kudos to each of your organizations. To all the viewers and listeners, whether you join through StreamYard, YouTube, or if you're in person at the museum in Charleston, we appreciate your time and your engagement. Your participation is what makes it meaningful for us to do these podcasts every third Saturday of the month. As we wrap up, a quick reminder, the next podcast is going to be Saturday, September the 20th, and you never would have guessed it. The discussion will be on DNA Revealed, the challenges and the triumphs in tracing your ancestry. So tune in. We'll have Melvin Collier on and Emma Macbeth. So just mark your calendars and join us, because that topic is definitely live and active right now throughout the United States and the world. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep connecting with your history. From all of us at the International African American Museum Center for Family History, take care and have the rest of the day for yourself. Appreciate it. Goodbye, all.